Welcome to another episode of True Talks, and it is with great pleasure that I have a wonderful guest, Bill Kleyman. Welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, Andy, if you can't tell, I am pretty excited. And this is the end of the day, by the way. This energy level has not stopped because I'm like, I got a call with Andy coming up. So I gotta maintain this level of caffeine. You ready for the secret? I've already switched to water. There's no more coffee here. Andy, thank you for having me here. I am Bill Kleyman. I am the co-founder and CEO of Apollo. Check this out right here. Apollo with one L. And in case you're curious, yes, it does have something to do with space. We can talk about the inception of the name, but I'm also very happy that those folks are out there on the Artemis spaceship coming back home here very, very soon. I am also the executive chair of data center programs for AFCOM and Informa, and I have the honor and pleasure of overseeing what is officially the world's largest and longest running conference. That is Data Center World, coming up in, my God, what, 2 weeks in Washington, D.C. I sit on a number of boards. I am the co-chair of the People program over at Infrastructure Masons, an advisory board member at Nomad Futurist, guest lecturer at USC School of Engineering, contributing editor. I've written a couple. No, I have not written. I have ADHD, so I can't write a whole book. I've co-authored a couple of Amazon bestsellers. And in case you haven't noticed, this is just all natural energy because I love this industry and I love what we do. That was a long introduction. I'm sorry that was so long-winded.
It was perfect, Bill. Bill, how many years? But how many years have you been doing this? And just give me a bit of a time frame there. How long you've been working on the data center space?
I graduated. You know what? Let me back up a little bit. If you ask a room full of people, did you plan on being in the data center industry? I will sheepishly raise my hand because yes, I did want to be here. I graduated with a network engineering and telecommunications undergraduate in 2005, and that's literally pretty much when I started working in data closets and network rooms before you even called them data centers back in the day. Then I got an MBA and other Masters in Information Security. But to answer your question, Andy, I started in this thing back in 2005. And before we get into even the first question, I can tell you that the past 24 months has surpassed my last 2 decades of experience in the industry, and I love it.
Bill, I think that does, what a great segue to the first question. So you and I kind of chose a title for this episode. It's Building at AI Speed, the Reality of Data Center Delivery. And are we breaking that delivery model? I think that's where I want to start the conversation. Bill, you have a great view of the biggest shift we've seen in many years, and AI is driving a massive wave of data center investment. From where you sit, Bill, on the front lines, what are you seeing today?
There's so many things that we can sort of dive into here and start to really discuss in terms of what's happening, and you can throw out trends and numbers. And you know what, Andy, we'll do that. We'll make sure we talk about this a little bit. By the way, I'm hoping that this show gets me even more wonderful human beings that I can connect with. In case you haven't noticed, I want to continue this conversation. So find me on LinkedIn. We can keep chatting about this. But what's wild about this industry is okay. Let me use an analogy. We live in a world that just discovered oil, but hasn't invented the internal combustion engine. We got all this raw material, and we're just starting to figure out what to do with it. And I've been in this industry for about 20 years, and here's the one thing that I can tell you: for all of this time, we assume that if you build a data center, power is going to follow, and I can confidently say that era is over. It's, in your own words, it's broken, right? And we're at a place right now where AI is forcing these fundamental shifts as AI evolves from facilities that are energy consumers, you ready for this, to becoming energy producers, right? Where we're integrating, blending on-site power generation, storage, grid integration to keep pace with demand. So when you start talking about, is it broken? Are we changing things? Oh my gosh, you better believe it. The way we build these facilities, like we just can't do it anymore. And just to kind of give you some perspective. So I get a chance to write the AFCOM State of the Data Center report. All right. And I've written that puppy for the past 10 years. So this is the 10th anniversary edition. Yay. And when we wrote the report 10 years ago, the average rack density, and for everybody listening, that's how much stuff you can shove into a data center rack, was about 6.1 kilowatts. per rack. And this is 10 years ago. Now, let's go back just a little bit further. Ken Patchett, who, if you're listening to this, hey, buddy, he's currently at Lambda Labs. In 1988, he was working at Microsoft. And you know what he told me? He's like, Bill, the average rack density at a Microsoft data center in 1988 was 1 kilowatt per rack. Andy and everybody listening, you could cool that with a box fan and plenty of Bill Kleyman optimism. You're all set, right? But fast forward to today, last year, our report showed an average rack density of 16 kW. This year, 27 kW per rack, a 70% jump year over year. So now we're redefining what these facilities look like, how we actually work with the racks, and not to blow this thing completely out of proportion. Last year at GTC, Jensen Huang gets up on stage. You know what he shows off? The NVL 576. Do you know what that is? 600 kW per rack. At this point, it just doesn't matter. Keep adding zeros, Jensen. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And when you start to take a look at this, I'm using your words, Andy, this broken paradigm. Have we broken the architecture? My gosh, you better believe it. We have new power systems designs, new requirements for, obviously, the dissipation of heat from mechanical equipment. We're talking about bringing direct current, DC, right into the rack, because all of a sudden, if you talk about a 1 megawatt rack and you're bringing AC power, your power cables are going to look like this, like a giant can of soup. But if you start bringing in DC, it's like a AA battery. But that requires a new thinking about power consumption, load bearing, battery systems, the way you design this environment as well. That was a very long-winded answer there, Andy. But oh my gosh, is it breaking? I think we've just absolutely blown the doors open of our concept of what a facility actually looks like in the age of AI.
Bill, fantastic. So let's double click on that. So if you think about the scale and you add the urgency to it, how are you starting to see projects being planned? So step back, right? You've got a new facility. We've got new facilities popping up in brown sites, new greenfield sites. But what are people doing from the fundamentals when they sit back and say, this campus, which includes power, water, energy, what are you seeing, Bud? What are some of the changes to meet that scale and urgency at the planning stage?
I truly believe that you need two things to be successful right now in this industry. You need power and you need bravery. And we're quickly realizing what that second part looks like, because it's deeply introspective. And what I want to challenge everybody, right? And there's a really fun saying out there, and you're going to hear me use all these fun acronyms and adjacent terminology. But so Peter Gross, he's one of the godfathers of this industry, and I'm really proud to say he's a board member of Apollo, my company. And he used to say that the data center industry loves innovation as long as it's 10 years old. Well, we don't have 10 years. You blink and 10 months goes by. So you have to reimagine your approach to building these facilities. Let me paint a perspective for everybody listening, because Andy, you asked the right questions and you want to double click on this. I recently presented and attended the Schneider Electric Innovation Summit. And while I'm sitting there listening to the presentation, they came out with a new metric. Everybody listening, just follow me for a second here. The new a flagpole that we're aiming to, how much power our industry is going to consume by 2030 is now estimated at 200 gigawatts. 200 gigawatts of power just for data centers alone. Now, for people listening, that might be like, Bill, you just said some really big things. I don't know what this means. Okay, 1 gigawatt is enough for a city of 1 million people. 10 gigawatts is a New York or a Los Angeles. 100 gigawatts is about 10% of all the lights that are currently on in the entire world. So when someone comes to me and says, Bill, we're going to require 200 gigawatts of power in the next 4.5 years, to me, that's like, oh, cool. So you want me to build you, 20 LAs, 20 New York Cities worth of power? Like, that just doesn't appear magically overnight. So we have to reimagine what this looks like. That's why on-site power generation is changing the game, why we're seeing so much creativity. But I want to answer your question specifically. What is our industry, and specifically organizations that are building out new infrastructure, doing to get ahead of this curve? There's a new facility that's coming online that's handling hundreds of kilowatts per rack. It's coming up in Phoenix. And here's the kicker. The what stood out during the design process, the early design process, is here's the secret sauce: power, cooling, and connectivity were all brought in early, way earlier during the design and planning process than you would have even considered in the past. And that goes back to my earlier statement, where the way we look at this architecture right now, where you build a building and you assume the power is going to come, full stop. That's not how you can look at this thing any longer. So right now, time to market, speed to market, getting the right partners in place, and securing those existential resources, well, that's paramount to you being able to bring up a facility online. Look, the average size of our facilities is getting ridiculous, right? In our data center report, the state of the data center, the average size is now 38 megawatts. I remember, Andy, and everybody listening, that was a full-blown campus. Now it's like one building in a giant campus. And that's how much has changed. The size of these facilities, what we're hosting in them. And the other big part of it is that we're not power consumers anymore. We're power producers as well. The nature of our facilities is changing. And along with that, we can't be complacent. We can't sit still. But bringing those core components into the design, into the build, into the engineering and construction process, that's what gets your facility up and running faster. That's what gets your facilities up and running in a much more effective way. But ultimately, that's what helps you secure, at least from a future perspective, a stronger foothold in an industry where, let's just be clear, demand is not an issue.
Yeah, it's key, Bill. I think you hit on something that I always try to pull out some truths, and hence the name Truth Talks for the episode. I think that is so important that people understand. Listen, you can't go to any small town, any large city, and people are talking about data centers. Somehow it's impacting them. It could be job creation. It could be people worried about power consumption, as you explained. But you said something that I think is really important and key. You're actually generating power, right? That's so important, because you hear a lot of people say, oh, they're worried about, the power, what's available, how much is available. But that point you make is really, really critical, right? You're actually generating power. You're using water, reclaiming the water. So the environmental impacts, I think if there's one thing that we need to do a good job on, is making sure people understand the benefits of the data center coming to your town, to your city, to your community. I think that's very important. Thoughts on that, Bill?
I couldn't agree more. I recently wrote an article on data center knowledge, where I'm a contributing editor, calling the data center the new front line. And I literally, Andy, as we're discussing this, I'm gonna send this link to you. I did a Facebook post. I'm gonna send it to you right now. And I call out the fact that we live in a very fragile moment right now for the data center industry. We're seeing legislation being passed to halt data center construction. An entire state is saying, I'm banning any facilities to coming online. And Andy, you can tell that I'm usually a very positive individual. I love what I do. I love educating people. But for the first time in my history in this space, we saw physical violence, right? There was 13 rounds put into a lawmaker's door in Indianapolis because they wanted to repurpose an old industrial site to become a data center, right? And this isn't NIMBY anymore, right? This is showcasing that there's something that's actually fundamentally broken between our ability to communicate the benefits of our facilities and the perception, right? And I'm heartbroken and I'm sad that there's actual metrics to prove this. So in the AFCOM State of the Data Center report for 9 years in a row, the number one threat to critical physical infrastructure was ransomware and data exfiltration. For the first time in 10 years, this year, it was human threats, accidental or non-accidental, human threats against these facilities. And so now we're starting to see this happen in real life in the world. I don't know what the answer is, but obviously resorting to violence is never going to be it's never going to be an answer. The simple truth is that we're not going anywhere, and neither is demand. And Kirk Offell recently posted another note saying that you can't be both you can't both benefit and also detract from this kind of technology, right? It's not, it doesn't work this way, this push and this pull, right? You're clearly using AI and generative AI. So how do you get your mind straight? We do have a PR problem, right? We do have a situation right now where we went from this industry that was, very little known about us. We were these nondescript buildings in the middle of nowhere to all of a sudden, look at us. We're having a moment. People know who and what we do. I've had more conversations around data centers with people who would have never asked them before in our entire life. Andy, I feel like this is a very special moment. Data center world is going to have a policy forum. We're going to have lawmakers, senators, representatives, folks from the current administration, previous administration, there to specifically discuss the impacts of digital infrastructure. And it's not from do we build it? Do we not build it? These things aren't going anywhere. How do we become better partners? And Chris Crosby coined this term, how do we become the 100-year neighbor? Because that's ultimately what we're going to become. Unfortunately, I don't have a solution on this call. I think it's a much deeper problem that we've had as an industry because we've kept quiet. It shot us in the foot, unfortunately. And now we're in a position where there's so much PR, there's so much negative conversation. And to be honest with you, it's because we are easily the largest non-regulated industry that's now critical infrastructure. And is that going to change? Quite possibly. Do you think we might start facing regulation as we become power producers? It's quite possible as well. Is it a bad thing? I don't know. Maybe it's actually something that becomes good and allows us to work more closely with utilities, more regulated industries, because maybe that's simply what this industry finally needs. But there's a lot of work ahead of us in this topic.
No, Bill, I think it's key. And, just in the small community that I live in, I live a little north of the city of Pittsburgh. I mean, you can look at the positives. There was an old coal fire power plant along the Ohio River, literally just a mile and a half from my house. And that's being converted to gas, right? Which is a great clean energy. And it's being converted to power of a massive data center, right? So again, it's creating jobs. It's taking a rundown old coal plant, converting it to clean energy with gas. It's creating a data center. It's creating jobs for that data center, long-lasting jobs. So, like you said, for all the negative that's out there, you can very, very easily combat that with very positive. And being part of the, living in the still belt for as long as I have. I mean, we always look for that innovation, that next industry that's going to change, change people's lives forever. So keep up the good work.
100%, 100%. And I'm going to add to that a little bit. So Switch Data Centers, my alma mater, I spent just shy of 4 years there. You ready for this metric? They consume 30% of all the power in the state of Nevada. 30%. And yet somehow, because of the relationship that they have and the close ties to the utility commission, they're actually one of the very few states who's lowering the rates for the ratepayers in their communities. Whoa. You're talking about a facility that if you flip the power, it could literally light up the entire strip. That's how much power they consume, right? But you're also saying that because of relationships, strategic partnerships, they can actually lower these rates. Yes, this is all possible. But again, there's a lot of work that needs to get done to, move beyond legislation, to go actually create these great partnerships with utilities and commissions, and honestly work with an aging grid to make something special happen that benefits the people who are both living close to data centers, but also paying electrical bills.
Yeah, for sure, but absolutely on that. So let's shift the conversation. So, why do I and my team at Contribute, why do we care about this market? And we look at capital programs, massive capital programs that encompass the entire ecosystem of data centers, everything we've talked about, power, water, building the facilities, the campuses. Bill, that capital expenditure is so massive that the funding for it, even the largest, most successful organizations in the world are having trouble managing that capital, making that capital available, the scale, the fast deployment of capital. Bill, from your vantage point, what are companies doing around managing that capital? Really, I've heard numerous times, cost doesn't matter. Such a big issue. I gotta believe Cost does matter. Schedule obviously matters. You have to have your facility up and running. People are depending on having their, their information, their AI distributed. And then more importantly, there has to have visibility of cost and schedule. So Bill, what's your thoughts on that? Well, how are organizations getting their hands around these massive capital expenditures, and how are they looking at costs, and how are they managing schedule across their portfolios?
Well, let's just state the obvious. There's a tremendous amount of capital being passed into the digital infrastructure industry, whether it's telco, whether it's physical building infrastructure, building these AI factories, et cetera. We're not short on cash. I think that maybe sometimes we're a little bit short on direction. And I've had the question asked me, Bill, are we overbuilding, right? And I don't necessarily believe that right now, because this is all about building the foundation for the future, right? Because I think if we take a step back a little bit and understand the implications of AI, these high density workloads, this isn't a technology shift. Everybody listening, right? This is a shift in humanity, right? The way we interact with data, and I promise, Andy, I'll answer the question. The way we interact with data has fundamentally changed for forever, right? And what's wild about that is that every single person listening to this, watching this, you're a user of generative AI, whether you like it or not. Just a couple of years ago, before 2023, right? We were trained, we were conditioned as human beings to interact with data in a very specific manner. Andy, who wants to ask a question, he'll go on his favorite search engine. It could be Ask Jeeves or Alta Vista. And if he's feeling feisty, maybe even Google or Bing. It's funny. I recently did that bit at the Ask Jeeves one in front of some high school students, and they're like, what is this guy asking his butler for directions? What's an Ask Jeeves? So I can't use that, and I also can't use the word Rolodex in front of high school students because they're not going to know what it is. But when we start to take a look at this, we've been interacting with data via blue links, right? So Andy goes and he asks a question and he gets a whole bunch of blue links. God forbid Andy ends up on page 2 of Google. Forget it. You're lost at this point. You just give up on it. You're asking the wrong question. Give up, ask again. Now, if you go on your favorite search engine and you ask a question, the first response is no longer a blue link, is it? It's a full-blown original AI generated response. That's how fast we, under the human condition, have been how fast we've been forced to change the way we think about how we ask questions and how we interact with data. All right, take that for what it's worth. That's our new sort of iteration of AI. Now, moving beyond that, humanity's first instinct whenever we discover anything new is, can we let it on fire? And the equivalent of that is ChatGPT. But obviously what we've learned over the past couple of years, that ChatGPT and Copilot, it's not the answer for everything. We're seeing AI agents, AI workflows, new kinds of AI apps, really specific types of tools. That's what my company Apollo actually focuses on. We don't build elephants on a unicycle. Right, they look great, but they don't do anything for your business, right? We build these powerful AI agents and apps that specifically live in highly secure environments, managed and controlled by our own GPUs that we can then deliver to the end user. But going back to your earlier point, capital and the amount of money that's being spent, it's only going to continue to increase. What I believe is going to become, what's going to happen is it's going to be a lot more strategic, right? We're going to pick the right markets, the right areas of where we can invest. Look, when I was at Switch Data Centers, I was super honored, and it was a moment of like learning for me to be a part of a team that, when I joined, we were $4.5 billion public trade organization, and here I am, working with this amazing team that ultimately we positioned it and we sold this company to IFM and Digital Bridge for $11 billion and took the company private. Now that was in December of 22. Fast forward just a little bit, look what happened to Lion Data Centers. $40 billion. $40 billion sale. Holy cow, right? And we're not done seeing those kinds of, billion-dollar acquisitions and transactions happening. That tells me very clearly that there's still a high level of demand, that we haven't necessarily seen the end of what this demand cycle looks like. And Jensen Huang got on stage this year, and do you remember what he announced? He said that welcome to the era of inference. That's it. We're going to see inference at the edge. We're going to start to see more compute, more secondary, tertiary, fourth level markets coming online, because let's be honest, primary markets are completely saturated. Less than 1% capacity. That's like nothing. That is like nothing in these major markets. So you shouldn't be surprised if you start to see, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, Idaho, Illinois, all these other places that traditionally, didn't have as much critical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, now coming online. My biggest belief right now is that I really think that while there will continue to be a massive amount of capital expenditure being spent on systems and machines and computers and AI gear, it's going to become more strategic and much more aligned with specific market value and what's in demand. And right now, it's going to be some of these smaller facilities doing inference. Actually, we're at a point right now where these investors are like, cool, cool, cool. You've made all these large language models. Now let's see if they can make us some money, right? Beyond just Copilot. Actually, how does this drive revenue? And we're quickly getting to a point where that's going to become the biggest part of the conversation in terms of how do we support this massive capital outlay to support these systems. But the other reality is this: like it's a natural progression. I understand it's way more money. I understand that we're spending a lot more dollars, but like, look, we're not working with pizza box servers anymore, right? This isn't like a $5,000 or $10,000, like Cisco or Dell box. A single chassis of B200s, dude, that's like $500,000. You're going from like a Toyota Camry to a Lamborghini here, right? And to support that Lamborghini, you have to have a lot of really expensive parts and components, right? And a lot of that revolves around some very core existential questions that a lot of data center operators have to ask themselves. If I'm on raised floor tiles, can I handle the weight of this gear? Am I capable of putting a water manifold here? Can I design a new busway or a new power system to handle this new level of density? These are real design questions that require, like you said, Andy, capital, that requires a rethinking of the architecture. And I think that's great. I'm an agent of change. I love being a little bit uncomfortable as things sort of ebb and flow and evolve. But there's going to have to be capital outlay. There's going to have to be capital flow. But I don't think it's misguided, right? I don't believe that we're necessarily overbuilding this stuff. And I get the question a lot, Bill, is this like the dot-com bubble? I don't believe that it is, right? So much of this is being invested with companies that have a lot of backing, a ton of foundation, and clearly quite a bit of revenue and customer base as well. So, very long-winded, clearly, but the way we manage the capital outlay that's being spent is just strictly becoming more strategic, not just throwing money in the wind, but following exactly where this market is going and supporting the systems that go along with that flow.
Bill, fantastic. Bill, you've been super gracious with your time. I've got one last question. So, Bill, you have the opportunity to advise owners of massive data center campuses, right? That's what you do every day and all your reporting. If you were sitting in a room with owners today, right, what would be the one thing that you would tell them that they need to get right from day one on a brand new facility? Like, what is that one thing that they must get right to be successful?
I go back to my earlier statement of power and bravery, right? I truly believe that in this industry right now, if I were to really try and summarize it in one sentence, be brave enough to begin before you feel ready, and disciplined enough to keep learning after everyone else stops. And that bravery is not something I or Andy or any of those wonderful guests that you've had on this show can tell you what it looks like. Only you can. And that is a true moment of introspection, because you can either choose to keep going and building something special, or you can just hang back. Because here's the truth, Andy, we're still going to need email servers. And we're still going to need SQL and Citrix and VMware and Exchange and web apps. And if you're going to just, support 10, 15, 20 kW racks, fine. That's totally okay, right? But if you're prepared to take that next leap, into that new space, my biggest point here in terms of what it takes to be successful, those leaders who will thrive are the ones that treat change not as a threat to survive, but as a signal to learn more, move, and grow with purpose. That's it. There's no secret to it. If I'm sitting there and designing some of these facilities, and I'm very honored to be amongst those folks that are building some of these, they go after these solutions in a completely different kind of perspective, and they're brave about it, but they're pragmatic. They go, and this is Chris Crosby says that they build with intention.
That's key. Very good. Bill, I always like to give my guests a final couple seconds on something that you're passionate about, something that doesn't have to be data center related, but something that you're passionate about. We will continue this conversation online. We'll get this out to all our networks. I have a global audience that follows this. We'll have plenty of time to continue the conversation. But Bill, how do you want to end this? But what's one thing you'd like to share with the audience?
Oh my gosh, I think so far we've had so many fun analogies and so many fun acronyms and all of that, right? Um, you know, it's a truly pivotal moment, I think, in our industry. And the one thing that the one golden nugget that I've found success in and others have is you use this moment that we're having as a moment of reflection for you and your business, and be brave in that reflection and go after a market that's truly hungry, and in that process take a couple people with you, help some people grow, help some people do something special, have an open mind. And there's a great quote from Ted Lasso, and that's how we'll end this. I think, be curious, not judgmental.
Fantastic, Bill. Bill, I appreciate your time. We'll continue this conversation online. My friend, thank you, bud. It was great conversation. I appreciate you, bud.
Thank you, Andy. This was awesome.
See you soon.